Okay, thank you. All right, welcome everybody who joined us so far. I'm Mark Snyder with the RMAD unit, and Emery, David, and I put together this presentation for you, or rather, we put together this forum for Carla and Iridian to give a presentation about the State Fair Comprehensive Waste Study. For those of you who don't know her, Carla is the Sustainability Coordinator for MPCA. She works on operational sustainability, education, and policy, specializes in waste and recycling for all of our state agencies. She leads several sustainability focus groups for the state, including the Minnesota Sustainable Sports and Events Coalition, the Minnesota Solid Waste and Procurement Work Group. Carla also served on the steering committee for the Sustainability Practitioners Roundtable, sits on the board of the Friends of Gray Cloud, and helped found the Minnesota Reusables Coalition and our own agency equity committee. Carla manages reuse grants, participates on the state sustainable procurement team, and assists her agency with health and wellness initiatives. She holds the ISSP SA certification from the International Society of Sustainability Professionals as a qualified administrator of our IDI Intercultural Development Inventory, which she uses as a competency and equity coach. She also mentors some of our Minnesota Green Corps members, volunteers with Friends of the Mississippi River and other conservation organizations, and my favorite part, Carla, is also a cat foster mentor, and cat adoption event coordinator for Pet Haven, which is Minnesota's first and largest foster-based pet rescue organization. In her free time, imagine she somehow has that. She loves to backpack, canoe, hike, and get lost in the woods. Right, take it
It's
away,
so
Carla.
long. Thank you. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it. Well, thank you for that welcome. I am the sustainability coordinator for PCA. As Mark said, take on a lot of different things depending upon what I think needs to get done in the moment and where the priorities lie. And so, what I'm going to present on today is really a passion project I've had for many, many years to try to get a handle on waste and just the volume of waste and what we could do about it at the Minnesota State Fair. So I will get into a ton of detail. I'm going to do my best to kind of breeze through the things that I need to, but I want you to see it because I think it's so important to have that context. But please do just Mark, let me know if there are questions, and I'll try to get to those too because that's also super important. But I'm going to go ahead and get started. So hold tight. All right. Can you see my screen okay?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. So like I said, this is a kind of a breakdown of the Minnesota State Fair Comprehensive Waste Study. So I'm going to talk about what that was. I'm going to talk about just kind of why we did it, what our methods were, the study results, which I think is kind of the most interesting part, which is like the detailed results. And then some key findings, because that kind of summarizes what we found and what that meant. So it's a little different than the results themselves. And then the recommendations we've provided to the fair. So first of all, introduction. And you should see this is a dumpster from outside the food building where lots of lemonade and fruit is being served. So you can see a lot of organic waste in that organic dumpster. Why a waste study? So, and after this presentation, of course, I can always send this out to folks who are interested. It is not located on our website anywhere. It's something you have to ask me for, but I'm happy to send it out to anyone and everyone who's interested. So, oh, and let me get this out of your way. This might be visible. There you go. So why did I do this? So the first point there is really the reason. The Minnesota State Fair generates over 6 million pounds of waste each year, and it's roughly in 12 days. Some of that is a little bit before and after, but broadly speaking, it's primarily concentrated in those 12 days. So the Minnesota State Fair is also the largest state fair in the country by daily attendance, and it's only second to the Texas State Fair, just overall as the largest state fair. So it is a huge event nationwide, and it gets a lot of attention, right? And so we have a lot of opportunity to do some real good here and set a big example to other state fairs, to other fairs any size, and large events of any size. So if we can really do some good stuff here, imagine that example we can provide for others. So the motivation there, of course, is that we can really improve the way that these kinds of events are done. And specifically for Minnesota, we have statewide diversion goals. We would like to see things, we'd like to reduce our waste overall in the state that we're generating. And so there's definitely a motivation to look at this huge waste generation event and see what we can do to improve it. And then the timing piece. So this was just serendipitous. I've been working with the fair for about 8 years at this point when the opportunity arose that a volunteer mass from the Rotary International was looking for a volunteer event that they could use their volunteers for. And so I piped up and said, hey, I got something I need help with. And so they chose my project and said, yep, we'll help you and we'll give you as many volunteers as you need. So that was a huge opportunity to actually go forward and execute this study that I've been wanting to do for so many years. So that's the reason. Let me advance. So how did we do this? So you see my binders there. I had lots of binders for lots of different groups of people. But basically just getting, again, that first piece, that objective of what we were trying to achieve. I wanted to conduct a waste study to understand their current program, what's good about it, what's not working, right? So that we can really assess and give real recommendations that have value. So that second piece is really provide recommendations to the state fair that will actually make a real difference, not something they've thought of before, not something they've tried before and it just doesn't work, something really bigger, more comprehensive, something beyond just kind of a waste sort. And what I said there is you can't manage what you don't measure, right? So if we go out there and we actually get a sense of what the state is, then we can do a lot more to understand what we can do about it. So the methodology, how we designed this. So I wanted to first observe their current program. And when I say their current program, you see a picture there of the bins that they're using for just regular folks who come to the fair along the streets and everywhere that you go. There are what I deemed street side bins. And so I wanted to study how those were being used, how effective they were, how they were signed, how they, if they were contaminated, what was going on with them. So first was to just observe those bins throughout every day of the fair. Then the dumpsters. So the dumpsters are sort of visible to the public because they're kind of behind buildings and so on, but you can walk up to them, you could throw stuff in them theoretically. So I wanted to really get out there and look at what was going on with the dumpsters. Did the vendors use them? Were they signed correctly? What colors were they? Did they make sense? Were they located where they were supposed to be? Things like that. And then front of house observations. This is when I'm talking about vendors, like if you go up to a booth or you go up to a food, seller, what stuff are they automatically giving people? What are they doing? Receipts? Do they have packets, or do they have lots of napkins and silverware and things that are throwaway that they're giving away automatically? Like what's going on just front of house? Then the second piece is, instead of just observing all of these things, we wanted to have some conversations. So I wanted to talk to the people who actually work in the waste, work with the waste, or have to interact with it in some way. And that's the vendors themselves and the Minnesota State Fair staff. So I met with both vendors, hundreds and hundreds of vendors, and interviewed them, as well as interviewed staff for the Minnesota State Fair at every building, and then, wandering staff as well. So lots of comprehensive conversations. And then the last piece was to do a waste sort as well. And a waste sort is something that the fair has done in the past, so that wasn't new, but it's still helpful to have that baseline of understanding what kind of waste were they creating, where was it getting diverted to, if at all, and what could be improved there. So that was just a one-time event where all of these other things were done over the whole period of the fair, and in fact, much before and after as well. But that waste sort was just a one-day waste sort. All right, so the timeline. So I planned this over a 10-month period, and then the on-site conducting the study was done from August 6th to September 6th. Most of those days I was on site, but 16 of those days were 10 hours or more of being out there myself, observing, talking to vendors, talking to staff, and taking thousands of photographs. So lots of data gathering. And then the volunteer teams that I put together, I had teams doing those observations I described, having the conversations I described, and then doing the waste sorting. the team, those observation teams, just a handful of us were doing the conversations. But you see on the right-hand side there, kind of a list of who the volunteers were. So of course, that Rotary International group that I talked about, they were a huge help. Primarily, we use them for the waste sort, but also for some of those other pieces. And then the recycling ambassadors from some of the local counties, solid waste experts who actually do this for a living, who volunteered to help me, both at the University of Minnesota and just government employees that do this. So some of you even possibly were part of the team. So I just like to mention the scale of this. I know I already said 6 million pounds of trash in 12 days. But the Minnesota State Fair welcomed over 1,000 vendors to the 2024 fair, and we interviewed, I interviewed almost 400 of them myself. So we talked to a lot of people and got a lot of firsthand perspectives on this program. And then the waste sort itself, just 1,700 pounds of waste that we went through in about 6 hours. So that was specifically waste that came from those street side bins. So basically what was the public putting in the bins, not so much the vendors and the dumpsters or anything like that. And then I did a whole bunch of data analysis on the back end, documented all of these photos and conversations and data, like the waste sort. I have a picture on the right of what I ended up putting together as my core team. So it's myself, it's Carrie Wagner, who no longer works there, but she was at the Department of Administration on the left-hand side there. And she works in solid waste and specialized in waste sorts. So she helped lead up the waste sort piece of it. And then the person in the middle is John Schrader from MinTap at the University of Minnesota, who basically was my sidekick and went around with me and interviewed all the vendors together, so that we would get two perspectives to the same conversation and make sure we heard the same things, so that it wasn't, getting any bias to it. So that was my core team. And now I want to get into the results. So this is the really cool stuff. So get ready. And you can see in this picture even just some packaged things, especially on the bottom. A lot of products were packaged in plastic film, which is one of the things we noticed a lot of. So for the actual results, I'm breaking it down into 6 sections, basically. And I'm going to go through these pretty quickly because ultimately we just don't have time to get into the nitty-gritty of everything. But like I said, feel free to ask questions, and these slides are available. I can send them out, and they're also on the X Drive. So, it's available for you to look back on later. But the study itself has everything in detail, so you can check it out in the study. But basically, those 6 types of studies that I did, that I broke down into the different results, are the waste sort itself, which you see the photo of. We've got some Rotarians doing some sorting there. The street side bin study, the dumpster study, those front of house observations, and then we call it the back of house conversations, or that vendor conversation, and then the state fair staff. Okay. So first, what did we find in the waste sort? So we found that the fair was currently diverting about 20% of their total street side waste. And when I say diverting, I mean it's going, to either recycling or organics. It's not going just to trash. So you can see what the breakdown of that is 14% of all of the waste was recyclable, or was going to recycling. There were more things that could have been recycled, but it was what was sorted to be recycled. And 6% was going to organics, okay? Of the trash we went through, only 38% was actually trash. 62% of it should have been put in recycling or composting, or could have been, right? So there's an opportunity there. When we went through what was in the recycling bins or recycling bags, 65% of it was right and was recyclable. 35% of it was not. So there was a good high level of contamination in there. And then about 2% of the material we sorted through were things that were reusable, and in perfectly brand new condition. So things like souvenir cups and buckets, giveaways, hats, water bottles, reusable bags, frisbees, things that people had probably picked up from a vendor, or in a building and thrown immediately in the trash. So you can kind of see there's some opportunity there just based on the waste sort results. Now, really quickly, I just want to tell you what I'm talking about, because when I talk about the street side bins and the dumpsters, I'm going to refer to these 5 things. These are just the things I like to use to determine how well a waste program is functioning. So the first thing is co-location. And what that means is that if you're collecting recycling and trash and organics, or just recycling and trash at an event, that you keep those bins located together, because when they get separated, the further they are apart, the more contaminated they get, because people just throw things in the bin they see, right? But if they're connected to each other or right next to each other, they have a thought process typically of, oh, where do I put it? So co-location is pretty important. Then color. Color is something I've worked on since I started at the PCA and before, having consistent colors for what we're trying to collect in a bin. So usually that means we use black for trash, blue for a recycling bin, green for an organics bin, and red for hazardous waste. Now there's lots of different colors you can use. Yellow is common for reusables, but we do see a lot of organizations using their branding colors or, something, and gets very confusing. So color does matter. Clarity just means, is the signage there? Does it tell you what to do? Is it clear what's supposed to go where? And are there multiple languages present, Braille, things like that, to help make it usable for folks of different abilities? And then capacity, is there enough space? If they're emptying it once an hour, is it always overflowing, or is that adequate? What's going on with the capacity? Does the bin need to be bigger, or do they need more people servicing those bins? And then consistency, are they the same throughout so that people understand and they can continue to use them the same way? Or are they different all over the place? And so it gets more confusing. So that's what I'm talking about when I say those 5 things. Now, I'm going to talk about the results for each of the studies based on those things. So for the street side bin study, co-location was a concern. Basically, 33% of the bins were not co-located, meaning they were alone, located by themselves. And when bins were co-located, where they were together, the contamination rate of the recycling was 10% and the contamination rate of the trash was 31%. When I say contamination rate of trash, I just mean that's how many things should have been in recycling or organics, but weren't, right? They ended up in the trash, but could have gone somewhere else. So 31%. So when they're co-located, those numbers aren't terrible, but it's not great, for the contamination of the trash, but not terrible. When the bins were not co-located, like you see on the right there in those photos, the contamination rate of the recycling was 23% and the trash was 51%. So just everything just went in those bins, right? I'm actually surprised it wasn't worse for the recycling, but it's probably because they're really small and they have a circle. It's really limited what you can fit in them. But you can see people sure tried. And so in that photo on the far right, you can really see people trying to jam stuff in those bins because they just don't know where else to put it. And then for color, we saw that bins were pretty consistent at the fair because they've used the same bins for many years. They have the same white kind of big tote bins that they use for trash. And then Coca-Cola, about 15 years ago or so, donated all of these Coke bottle recycling bins. And so that's what they've been using the whole time. Some of them are black, some of them are gray. They have different variations, but generally speaking, they are the same. However, they did not have consistent colored bags in them, which is confusing because that generally means that when it gets picked up, it gets put in wherever. If it's black, it's usually trash. If it's clear, it's usually the recycling. So that was a concern, and I did see that a lot, which I'll get into in a bit. So clarity, the signage was present, but what I will say is it wasn't clear. So, and what I will say too is there was no signage on the white trash barrels at all. So anytime it was a trash can, it didn't say anything. It just blank. Anytime it was a recycling bin, they were relying on that donated bottle that's got an embossing of bottles and cans only. Well, for those who've gone to the fair, most of the recyclable material at the fair, there are some bottles and cans. Well, actually very few, but there are some. It's almost exclusively cups. And that's because the fair requires vendors to pour, like if somebody buys a bottle or a can of soda, they have to pour it into a state fair cup before they give it to the person that purchased it. So when somebody's holding a cup and they see this bottles and cans only, we saw over and over and over again that people thought that meant not the cup, when really the most common recyclable material at the fair is that plastic cup. So that's identified as a pretty clear issue. And then capacity, I think you can see it just in the couple of photos I've posted here. And like I said, I've taken thousands and they're all on the X Drive. that the capacity was an issue. They were regularly overflowing, and just it's either a matter of there needs to be more bins or bigger bins, or there needs to be more servicing of the bins, right? So definitely an overflow issue. And then consistency, I just have a couple
Hey,
examples
Carla,
here. Yeah,
We got 2 questions in
yeah,
the
there's
chat.
one question
go
about
ahead.
the percent that you gave. Were those percentages by weight or by volume?
Oh, that is by weight. Great
And we've got
question. By
another
weight.
one.
And then
Some
there's one more about those cups that the state fair issues. Are those able to be washed and reused?
They are recyclable cups, I believe, in number 5 polypropylene, and they theoretically could be washed, but not in a commercial setting because the heat would melt the plastic. So what we would need to do, which you'll see in the recommendations, is move to a reusable cup of a reusable food grade material. So, you could hand wash it, but not in a commercial capacity. No, no, they couldn't handle that heat. So anything else quickly?
No, that's it.
No. Okay. So consistency on the street side bin study was just fairly consistent. I want to be fair. Most of them were pretty similar, but you can see just here, there are lots of examples where it wasn't. I mean, I'm talking about, 800 bin sets. And many times there were discrepancies. So you see in these photos like a black barrel with no label and a white barrel with, it's not clear exactly what you're supposed to do there. I mean, right, you're making some assumptions based on the shape, basically, is all you have to go with there. And then the one on the right, what I'm showing you there is that there's a black bag in that recycling bin, which would theoretically mean that even though it's a recycling bin, when that maintenance worker takes that black bag gets tied off, that and symbolizes that it's a trash to the person who puts it in the dumpster. So it would be, when I see that, it'd be very unlikely to me that that would get recycled, right? So there's some issues there. We see some issues with consistency as well. So that's the street side bins. That's the stuff people see. But now I want to talk a little bit about the dumpsters. And I'm going to be a little bit brief here, even though there's amazing content here, because I just don't have time to go through it all. But I'm going to tell you really briefly that co-location, most dumpsters were located in a group, but many of them were separated by significant differences, and it caused a lot of people to throw things in the closest one. So you can see, and then I have a note here that there were 6 dumpsters that I noted on the map that the fair gives vendors, where the dumpsters are, that just weren't there. So that left vendors in a lurch too, of like, well, it says there's recycling here, but there isn't. So I'm going to throw it in the cardboard or the trash or whatever and contaminate something else. And basically what you see here too is that the colors were a huge issue. So colors varied drastically. And I'll say that you can see here in the details some of the variations of color. But basically what has happened over the years is they've used the same dumpsters that were originally green or black and have painted them many different colors throughout the years. And so most of them are a variation of multiple colors and are missing signage and so on. So I don't want to get into the details because I love this too much and I'll take up all of our time on it. But you can see that there's some really confusing labeling and dumpster issues going on here, just to start from, basic things. And for clarity, I'll just say, if you look at this picture, these are all different recycling dumpsters, just regular mixed recycling, not cardboard, but just any mixed recyclables, all different colors, all different signage, very unclear. And you can see from the percentages I have on here is that 83% of trash had no signage and the contamination rate was about 20%. That's not terrible, but it's kind of the catch-all, right? Where 40% of cardboard dumpsters had no signage and their contamination rate, when they didn't, was 48%. 35% of mixed recycling had no signage, contamination rate of those 55%. You get the picture. Signage and color matter, and it's very confusing and inconsistent currently at the fair. Capacity, you can see, was a major issue, and consistency, again, major issue. Very inconsistent signage, very inconsistent colors. Capacity was not there. There's material overflowing everywhere, making very unsafe conditions for a lot of folks. So just generally a big problem. And then I did also note a few key findings, which I will talk about a little bit later, but I wanted to include this for you as my MPCA audience, because I think you would want to see the detail a little bit, that there's a couple things. Used cooking oil was a huge problem in that they're using carts to collect the used cooking oil, but what's happening is they are not enough of them and they're overflowing. And so what's happening is usually high school kids and so on are lifting these big 5-gallon pails of heavy oil over their heads to dump them into a big cart, and it's spilling all over the place. And it's either spilling on ground, like you see in the photo there, or it's spilling on concrete, which makes it extremely slippery and unsafe. And so in this picture too, you see it was overflowing. It's hard to see it in the photo, but there's pools of oil sitting on top of the soil, and then there's buckets of oil piled up behind it. So definitely an issue. And then I also put, for potential for reuse, every picture on the right, and I have hundreds more, were dumpsters full of reusable, edible food, reusable things, toys, etc., things that were just thrown away, which I'll talk about as well. But vendors often said they buy things and throw them away at the end of the fair, whether they need them or not, because it's cheaper than driving it home and bringing it back. It's just easier. So they buy everything and throw it away at the end. So a lot of that going on. Front of house observations. I'll be really quick about this too, because it's a lot of data and I don't want to take up all of our time on that. But single-use items are a huge problem. And again, I'm not going to go through all these details. You can look at them, but basically there's just a huge amount of waste created by these single-use items. And this is just the breakdown of what those items were. But there's a lot of opportunity to alleviate a lot of waste by just getting rid of a lot of these single-use items that aren't necessarily needed. Also that vendors were assuming that people needed things, like they gave people receipts, without asking them, or gave them plastic bags without asking, things like that. And then single-use ticket processes. There's a lot of specific vendors who are using single-use tickets to give them, at the point of sale and then hand it off at the next person to go get the item that they just purchased. And it's very wasteful. They can use a token, they can use something else to do that. And these are just some examples on the right-hand side of some of those paper processes. So it's one of those huge opportunities. And this is another just breakdown of another way that that's done. So when it's a food vendor and you buy, a specific drink or a specific food item and they give you a token and you turn it in, they can reuse that token, right? Throw it in some sanitizer and put it back in the rotation, as opposed to a piece of paper or a ticket. But what was interesting that we found is that all event vendors, specific to things like the giant wheel or specific to the Midway Kidway, were using reusable plastic cards, but throwing them away, right? Which they could be theoretically reused at the end. And all the event vendors who run an event like the Butterfly House or the Haunted House or any of these kinds of ye old mill, like the rides, were requiring people to buy a paper ticket, like the giant slide, hand that paper ticket to someone else who tears it in half, puts half in a bucket, throws the other half away. And they're actually having state fair staff count those tickets, those half stub tickets, just to check to make sure the vendors are reporting that they sold is the same number of tickets that they're counting. And that's because the state fair gets a cut of all of those event tickets that are sold. Well, that could easily be done electronically. It would save a ton of staff time, be way more efficient and way more accurate. So just some really kind of strange paper processes that we saw, single-use paper ticket processes. So now talking about conversations. I'll just be brief about this. Many vendors that we talked to knew there was a recycling program, but most did not know that there were organics, and they want to do it. That's kind of the key takeaway. They're interested and they want to do it. Finding two is that many food vendors are not recycling bottles and cans. Most of them said that they were not. 88% is what we've estimated based on our conversations. So that's a huge opportunity. And then vendors expressed a need for better clarity and signage. They just didn't understand where they were supposed to put stuff when they got to the dumpsters. They couldn't find them. Stuff was confusing. I already did the dumpster study findings, so you know why. But just hearing that from the vendors that they were super confused, didn't know what to do, and need better guidance. And they want to do it right, but they don't know how. And then vendors are very willing to participate in these programs. So 95% said yes, they were very interested and wanted it to be better and participate in that. And vendors expressed a desire to see more programs and more reuse opportunities. So when we asked them, do you think that would be helpful? They were like, absolutely. And they were very grateful to talk to us and to have somebody who actually cared about it as well. So that was really helpful for me to hear. But then I also talked to the State Fair staff. And what I'll say here, I'm very careful about this because some of them are really easy to identify for State Fair leadership. But they were just very confused about how to feel about the program because they have major concerns about what they see. And they feel pride in the State Fair and they love working there, but they're very concerned about how much waste it's creating and how poorly it's being managed. And they have a lot of passion about this. A lot of the building, pretty much all of the building superintendents were very upset about the program that they were dealing with and that it was not serving their needs and that they needed better options and better communication and better training. So they wanted to see training, and they shared just a unanimous desire for a shift in organizational culture that actually prioritized sustainability and provided some sort of acknowledgement or a reward system for folks who cared about it and tried, right? So hearing that from staff, I thought was really powerful as well. So all of that is to say, here's our key findings. And it sounds like it would be those results, but it's not. It's actually kind of higher level. So the existing waste program, the successes. We know that the corn cob dumpsters are working well. So for those who know the fair, there's a corn roast booth, and right in front of it is compost dumpsters for the public to put their used, once they're done eating the corn, their cob in. And that's working really, really well. We also know that when vendors know about the back of house organics program, they're using it and they like it. And we also know that when vendors and staff are diverting large volumes of cardboard because the cardboard dumpsters were always overflowing. Very much something that, is being used and appreciated, and they like having that. And we did see that there are some specialty materials getting a second life. So for example, the animal bedding from the barns, wood chips from some of the specific areas were getting picked up after the fair and used elsewhere. So that was great to see, and we want to give credit to that. Also, within the actual waste reduction and diversion part, we were seeing that vendors and staff really want to see more diversion and reduction efforts, right? And they have a passion for this and they care about it and they want training, they're craving information. The other really great success is that the State Fair actually controls which vendors are allowed to participate, as you probably know, and what they're allowed to do, and what the public is allowed to bring into the fairgrounds. So as far as waste goes, they have everything within their power to tell vendors, you have to use these materials, you have to do it this way, you have to, this is the training, etc. They can control pretty much everything, which gives them a lot of power in this situation to make a lot of change. And then just that the State Fair has a ton of very eager partners. Many of us, like the state, counties, very low cost or no cost, that want to help the fair to do these projects. So here's the opportunities. And you saw some of this stuff already, but these are different photos talking about these opportunities that we've identified. So firstly, with the existing program, some State Fair branded cups are getting recycled, but a large percentage are not because of that embossing on the bottle. We saw that over and over again. People told us that over and over again. They didn't know what to do with the cups because it said not to put the cups in the recycling, right? Which is technically wrong, but that's what it looks like. And many vendors were not recycling bottles and cans back of house, which if you're a vendor who sells, cases and cases of beer that you're pouring into a cup and throwing every single one of those away and not in recycling, that's a huge miss, right? So that's the first two. Then we look at the existing program capacity and that best practice management. And we right away wanted to call out those used cooking oil carts are regularly overflowing, right? Causing contamination issues, dangerous conditions, definitely a problem. The dumpsters are confusing. We've addressed that. Overflowing, lack of clear signage, not always where they're supposed to be, and the capacity just wasn't up to what it was needed. And then the street side bins were often alone. They were overflowing, highly contaminated. There's opportunities there for a lot of improvement. Then within process, just the way things are done, we identified that paper ticket issue. That paper ticket processes are causing a large quantity of waste that we could avoid entirely. And vendors who conduct paper sweepstakes, so you think of those prize drawings and stuff, the ones that were doing it on paper, they're creating a lot of waste. And they've actually been telling us that they get more valuable interactions with people when they do it electronically because they can engage with them better than these paper ones anyway. So definitely an opportunity there. And then demand for program expansion here is that many vendors suggested an award program. They'd love to be on like a green vendor list. So if they're trying, at least they get credit for it. And then some vendors and staff really wanted to see a designated area for reusable items so that, you know, they know that they're going to need a drill and a ladder and so on when they get here, but it's not worth it for them to try to jam it into their truck or whatever. They can't fit it. So they buy one when they get here and they throw it away at the end. Well, at least this way they could rent it, right? And they could maybe just borrow it for what they need and have something like that going on. So a huge opportunity there. And then state fair buildings, we identified do not have recycling or organics bins, yet most of the recycling material, like paper and the stuff that's not just cups, is coming from those buildings. And it's going right into the trash in those buildings. So that was a huge opportunity to identify as well. So challenge areas, these are specific things that I want to call out. There were several common items that were identified consistently as contaminants in the recycling or organics. So the details are in the report, but basically it was all those single-use things, those small things, those packets, that little stuff that are really problematic. The volume of those single-use items used once or not at all and thrown in the trash was extremely high, like the packets that are never opened. Excuse me. And then many vendors are giving away individually wrapped products. And most vendors, almost every single one, especially merchandise vendors, less with the food, but certainly with food too, produced a high volume of stretch film plastic, which was all going in the trash and has a huge opportunity to be collected and recycled. One thing we found that was really funny, number 14, was that beer gardens didn't have access to recycling bins. Primarily, they just had trash cans, which is kind of counter, it just blows my mind. The beer gardens where most of it's being produced, all these cups, didn't have recycling bins. The Midway and Kidway were utilizing these reusable cards, but you throw them in the trash when you're done. So what the heck, right? Where they could be cleared and reused. 16 was really fascinating. I observed that men's restroom trash cans were often overflowing with plastic cups and realized it's probably because they need to set the drink down somewhere. They're just slamming it and throwing it in the bathroom trash. And there was a huge volume of these plastic cups in the men's rooms. So definitely an opportunity to collect recycling there. And then vendors were claiming that they use single-use products back of house because it was easier to work with their health inspector. Instead of proper hand washing and washing the reusables appropriately, they were just using single-use everything, single-use gloves, single-use, serving utensils, so that they didn't have to care about the health inspector and being, observed washing properly and things like that. It was a perception that it's easier to just do single-use. The dairy building specifically expressed a unique need to address the volume of liquid. So they were saying that a lot of people, apparently it's a huge problem. I don't understand it, but apparently people buy their ice cream in the dairy building, the big cup, and they throw it away on their way out, and it's mostly full or full. And so they're having very heavy trash, just full of liquid waste. It's very unsafe for them. They have to lift these super heavy dairy-filled trash bags out of cans. And so that's a huge opportunity to do some liquid recycling bins, potentially. And then several vendors expressed a need for a reusables rental program. Ken already talked about that, where they could avoid buying and throwing away all of these items just because it's too hard to transport them across the country. And then the last two is just sanitation staff. This is around org culture. Sanitation staff whose job it was to work in the sanitation program expressed just broadly very low morale, difficult attendance, not having the training they needed. Basically, just that waste management was not given much attention or respect. And and our observations and conversations with the fair, the sanitation team is one person who hires a bunch of temporary workers. And so the org structure does not show that they prioritize waste reduction or diversion at all, right? It's basically just try to get rid of it, is the message. And so however they do that is good enough. And that's really not what we want to see, right? So what did we do with all of this information? We provided recommendations. And so I broke them down into 3 basic chunks. So the first one is, let's update that org structure. Let's provide training that actually shows that reduction of waste and diversion of waste into recycling and organics and other places matters. And there's a reason to do it and we value it. So let's update that complete org structure and how we talk about this so that it's shown that it matters. And then second, let's update the existing program, what we already have, to allow for the successful utilization by vendors, staff, and the public. And I'll talk about what all that means, but you kind of get the idea already, I think, from all the things we've talked about that could be improved in the current program. And then number 3 is to expand the program. So, once we get the org structure kind of redone and we update the existing program, let's now take it to the next level and expand to address those challenges we talked about so we can really move the needle on some of this. And also I have to add the solution to some safety issues too, because there was some substantial safety issues in there too. So that step 1, that org structure piece, is these 3 recommendations, which is, let's first of all set some goals that actually say to our organization, we care about this. That say we want to do waste reduction and we want to do diversion, and then communicate about that, right? So that folks know that this matters. And then number 2, educate all the staff and vendors on these programs and give them clear training. What do they need to do? How do they do it? Because that has not been, they've never had that. And then the third one is a little bit bigger, but to create program lead positions at the state fair who have responsibility for not just one person doing all things for sanitation, but instead having a person who's recycling focused, a person who's organics program focused. And then I went to say a reuse person, right? And so really having people with that responsibility and accountability so that it's built into the organization instead of just, oh, and maybe try to do that if you can figure it out while you're at it, right? Which is never gonna work. It's just not gonna be possible. So we have some specific things in here. And again, in the actual report, all of these recommendations, I break down examples of how to do it, resources, in some cases like companies that can do it and estimates for them. So there's a lot of detail that's not here, but if you want to see the report, it's all broken down in there. So step 2, now this is where we start getting into those nitty-gritty of things. Update that existing program. So once you get the organization culture kind of set up to support this, now let's update that program, which would look like this. First of all, expand vendor and staff awareness of the current programs so they know, and that's all these bullet points, that they know what those things are that are available to them. Next, update all of the street side bins using best practices. So that's co-locating, that's color, that's clarity, it's all those C's that I mentioned. And then work on that sanitation team so that they're actually able to be managed and kept clean and emptied on a regular schedule. Update all the dumpsters, right? Because I lightly touched, believe me, there's so much more on the dumpster issues. But those basic things, co-locating, making sure the colors are consistent, that was a huge, huge issue. The signage, very big issue. And then, put them where they're supposed to be so that when vendors have a map and it says there's an organics dumpsters there and it's not there, they know, where it's supposed to be. Address identified process barriers. That's really generic because it's specific things, but basically it's those processes we described. Telling vendors, use electronic signups for your drawings, just no more paper. We've already heard from vendors that those don't work as well anyway. The electronic seems to get them higher value interactions. So that sounds like a win-win. Set an expectation that vendors use electronic ticketing and reporting. So eliminate that need to tear the ticket in half and have somebody that works at the fair sit there and count them all every day. And set the expectation that vendors use reusable tokens, when they're going from purchase to pickup of a product. And a lot of vendors are already doing it, and then a lot of vendors aren't, right? So it's just getting the ones who aren't doing it on board. I address these identified waste capacity issues. So this is where there's simple things like making sure the vendors break down their cardboard, because that was a huge part of why they were overflowing, is, you know, when stuff isn't broken down, it takes up way more room. And then that other piece about that used cooking oil program, to make sure that those are not overflowing, they're not unsafe, both to try to use and also just in general when they're overflowing. So definitely upgrade the capacity and just the way that that's being handled. And I have some really great suggestions on how they can do that. And then step 3 is expand the program, like I said, which is a bit more, there's a lot more to this part, because this is where I get kind of, you know, pie in the sky, but some of this is very doable quickly, and some of this takes a bit more time. But firstly, it's seek partnerships to assist in planning and execution. There are tons of organizations, including myself, including the MnTAP, including all of the counties. Everybody in Minnesota has most people have some sort of interest in improving this and helping with this. I mean, everybody I talked to was interested, really, truly, in either the results of this or helping with this or what can we do. And so there is a lot of opportunity here for the fair to have help that doesn't cost them money. So that's huge. And there's a lot of options out there. And then I have add building recycling and organics, like start with buildings. We know that there's opportunities, like you look at all of the buildings that have food, like the food building itself, like the agriculture building that has like the apple area, and they have all of the creative activities building that has all of the baked goods, all of that stuff. They don't have organics bins, they don't have recycling bins. So, you know, education building has massive quantities of paper from all of the different university booths, and most of that's going in the trash. So getting these buildings that obviously need more options than just trash, getting that to them and then helping them do it. So there's very specific things in there, but generally speaking, just getting these programs up and running where they aren't right now. And then set guidelines for vendors. This is where it starts to get a little bigger, where we say, okay, we have all these problem materials and we can tell vendors they can't do certain things, right? So they control everything. So the fair does. So they can set an expectation, which is what starts most of these specific recommendations off, that vendors recycle bottles, cans, and cardboard, that they don't print receipts automatically, that they don't provide straws automatically, they don't provide drink lids automatically, that they don't use foam products, you know, all these things. I have very specific things. I have one that the food products are not placed inside beverage cups. Well, the reason I have that is because there was a huge issue with contamination where there was lemons, like half lemons, in every lemonade cup, and people would drink the lemonade, throw the cup in the recycling, but it's half of it is a lemon. And so half of the recycling was contaminated with lemons or organics, which is a huge issue when it's that kind of volume, right? So, hey, lemonade vendors, don't put half of a lemon inside the lemonade cup, right? Which of course they're using less material. It's probably saving them a lot of money. So it's going to be more complicated than that. But the fair can just say, you can't do that anymore. And it would solve a huge issue that we're having in the waste side of things, right? So lots of things they could do there. Number 12, educate vendors on safe hand washing and using reusables back of house. This was to really combat that issue of it's easier to work with our health inspector if we just do everything single use. Well, technically that might be true, that vendor health inspectors are taking that kind of easy way out too, but that's not the law. And they do not need to do that. In fact, we have a lot of science that backs that single use is way dirtier than a reusable, properly cleaned or hand washed person. So definitely a huge opportunity there. I've mentioned a couple times creating a staff and vendor responsible operations program or green vendor program, giving them acknowledgement for doing this work. And then some of those specific things: expand recycling to beer gardens, expand recycling to the entrances of the bathrooms to get to the men's room issue that I would have never figured out if I hadn't done this study. pilot a liquid recycling program at the dairy building, just specifically because they have this huge issue of liquid waste there, right? Implement Kidway and Midway card collection bins for reuse and recycling. And then we could partner with an organization to reuse those cards instead of throwing them away. And then these last couple here are really exciting to me. Add a reusables program to eliminate single-use products over time. So this is like the big pie in the sky one. But this is where if they had a reusables person, they could, and I'm suggesting a phased approach, excuse me, but they can control what comes in and what goes out of the fair. And so they can say, we're going to, start with reusable cups in the grandstand and add in reusable serviceware. You can do reusable boats, reusable silverware, all of those things. And they can be durable plastics that last a long time and are recyclable end of life. And move into doing this state fair wide and having vendors do that and having one big bin for all things that you drink or eat off of. And then they're all reusable and they can go away from really having the need to do a ton of recycling and organics. Now, there still should be back of house that's still going to exist, but it wouldn't necessarily have to exist front of house if they really move to all reusables. And so there's a huge opportunity there. And we do have a local company that can accommodate it, which is a pretty incredible opportunity. So definitely suggesting that as a phased approach, that would be the biggest impact on this waste program. And then adding that reusables rental program I mentioned, having some sort of partnership with a hardware organization that could rent things to folks when they come and then they just use them and they're not buying and throwing them away when they leave, which we saw a lot of. And then lastly, add a plastic film collection program for recycling. So this is specifically because there was so much plastic film everywhere. Every vendor had tons of plastic film. Food, it was, hot dog bags and things like that. And merchandise, everything came in plastic film. And there was just it's as much as cardboard, right? And so that was just a huge opportunity where that is all going in the trash currently. So all of that is to say, I gave them this timeline, which of course now they haven't acted on anything, so we'd push it back another year. But really I just took all of those recommendations and broke them down by how they could implement them in a timeline format. And so for everybody who's engaged in this and interested, I'm meeting with the fair again on October 22nd. And walking through kind of this timeline and the recommendations and seeing where they're willing to partner, what stuff they're just not going to do because it's still up to them. But I think just having all of this information and all of these pain points and all these problems kind of shown, and I have, all of the data and the photos to back it all up, I think I'm hopeful that there will be an appetite for them to take us up on some of this and really act on some of it and move forward. And it's not just the fair. I've been working with all of the sports teams in the Twin Cities and all of the stadiums and many of the large events. And we've been rolling out reusables at CHS Field with the Saints, which is a smaller stadium, but we're, working on that and then working on it potentially for Allianz Field and all the First Avenue properties and potentially US Bank Stadium and some of the big facilities. It's just a TBD at this point, but it's not just me going to the fair and saying, you have to do this. Like, we're trying to do this region wide, or at least Minnesota wide. So, my message is consistent and I want everyone to understand like the same 5 C's that I'm using with the fair, I use with all of them. And I'm always trying to create a consistent experience across any event that anyone goes to in the Twin Cities or in Minnesota broadly. So the closer we can get to that dream and ideal, the easier and better it'll be. And the more we're going to achieve those waste reduction goals, because that's how, when people have a consistent program that they understand, they know what to do, that's our biggest barrier because it's so inconsistent. It's so confusing for people. So a lot of opportunity for improvement here. I'll just tell you, there's a ton of resources in the appendix that I provide the fair. Again, the study itself has a ton of information. I think it ended up being something like 70 pages. So it's a lot, maybe 65, something like that. So it is a lot, but that's because I wanted it to be something that was useful and not just another thing that says, here's, all this data, go figure out what you're going to do. but really give them something tangible. Here's the people who can help you with this. Here's what, here's the bids. Basically, I literally went out and got bids on certain things for them. So to really help them prioritize and figure out what they want to do. So with that, I have 3 minutes left to take questions, but yeah, any questions for me?
We've got one question about balancing single-use like compostable versus reusables in the water consumption.
Love that question. So broadly speaking, I'm going to be really high level here. I do not recommend compostables as much as possible because life cycle wise, they are worse than a plastic cup. Like if you're thinking of a compostable cup versus a plastic cup, they are worse environmentally, life cycle wise, if they don't get composted. And that is a big caveat, but a lot of them don't. It's a huge percentage actually, because it's very confusing. So compostable products, when they're in a facility that's mixing recyclable materials, they don't have a great success or capture rate is what we call it. And when that happens, we're actually worse for the environment, right? So especially large events where it's public facing and there's a lot less control, and even in this situation, when I say less control, I mean, it's hard to get people to read a sign, right? Or look at the bin before they just throw it in whatever's nearest to them. So I really don't recommend compostables as a solution. It's just not going to get us there because people, no matter what we do, we've done so many years of this, that it just doesn't have a good enough capture rate or success rate to be better. Whereas reusables, you have that front end piece where you're putting the effort in and that energy and that in ahead of time, but it pays for itself very quickly, and it's the only long-term solution. And really, it's what we've done until at least the 50s. Everything was done with reusables, right? So, I mean, we didn't even do single use until the last few decades. So that is kind of the answer to that. Is I will recommend it in certain situations where you can really control it. And if you're post sorting and we have 50 people after an event sitting there sorting it, making sure it goes in the organics, okay. But if we can't do that, it's not typically the best option. And go ahead, Debbie.
Well, with that reusable, and then you said there was a company that came and
Yep.
did it and cleaned it and all that. Then would
Yep.
those vendors then get them back?
No, it wouldn't be vendors.
No.
It would be the fair's materials. So what happens is this company, this is what we're using for CHS field and what we're going to use as much as we can get other facilities on board, is it's a company out of Golden Valley. They can they work all over the country, called Our World. But if there are competitors, we would consider them. There just isn't really regionally. But what they do is they have a stock of many millions of pieces and they wash them. They have a giant wash hub out in Golden Valley and they just do a route and they deliver it all washed and clean and ready for you. You have a centralized stock. So it doesn't say US Bank Stadium or Minnesota State Fair. It's a generic boat or cup or piece of silverware. And the idea is that that goes into a common pot, common bins. They pick it up, they wash it, they bring it back. They just bring it to all the facilities that are signed up, like a subscription service.
Okay,
and you
so
sign
the
up for
state
however
fair,
many
so the
pieces.
state fair, and then if all the vendors are doing it, because I'm sure there's a cost to the vendors as well as the state fair, then would the state fair have a common area for the vendors to go get these? Is that
Yep,
what
it's
the thought
actually
is?
the same structure they currently have with the cups. They have a cup warehouse that all the vendors have to come and buy their cups from. So what would happen is basically the fair they have a current revenue stream of selling plastic cups to the vendors, which they are required to buy. So it's kind of funny. They're required to buy them from the fair and use them. But what they could do instead is eliminate all of that single use and just house the reusables and have it be one stock. It doesn't matter what vendor you are, whatever, you just get boats
Right.
or cups or whatever you need. And then when people buy things, there's just big yellow bins around the fair that they throw it in. It doesn't matter where it came from. It gets washed, it gets brought back. So
Okay,
that
yeah, okay.
system could be the same.
That's what I was just wondering. So then they
Yep.
just go, okay. I didn't know
Yep.
that they had to go buy the cups like you said and all that.
They
I didn't know
do.
they had to do that, but yeah.
It's an
Okay,
interesting challenge for me in the recommendations because the state fair makes a lot of money off of forcing the vendors to do specific things by buying single use from them. So we have to work around how to make sure they still earn the money they want to earn off of the
Right.
vendors. It's quite an interesting relationship, really.
Well, right, but I mean, in the long run, they're helping the environment,
Oh, yeah.
and it's a Minnesota State Fair, then they should wanna help our our
And
environment.
trash is taxed 70% in Ramsey County, so they would save.
I
And
know.
I've been working on this on the back end with MinTap. I'm trying to quantify the cost to do reusables versus how much they will save by not having the trash. And
Right.
it's substantial. I don't have it yet because we have to make a ton of assumptions because the fair won't give us real numbers. So we make a lot of assumptions.
Well, you know
But
what, they change,
yeah,
but they change all the time. I have a
yeah,
business too, so
yeah,
I know I get taxed on my dumpsters, and it's in Ramsey County, and so yeah, it changes over time. The like waste management, they can't even. Well, if the taxes change, then your
yeah.
rate's going to change, and we have nothing to do with it. So it
Yeah,
just all
and they're
depends on that.
tricky too. You have to keep an eye on it because they'll often add fees and things that you have to dispute, and they'll be like, "Oh, never mind," but they'll just do
Right.
that a lot of the time. Yeah, so you have to.
Oh no, I watch my
Calling is
bill.
tricky.
I watch my bill
Yeah,
very closely.
yeah, and then that's
Oh,
not to say they're all doing that, but it can be difficult. So for the fair, there is a clear incentive financially to do this
right.
as well, but it's a tricky thing to convince them because they see it in those silos of, well, we sell cups to the vendors and that would take that away. And it's like, well, you can still do that. And there's ways to do it, but yeah,
Yeah, you
definitely.
could still do it. Now you're going to save on your trash. So
Yes,
you can still
exactly.
sell them to the vendors,
Yep.
right? But they're just going to be a
It
better
would be like a
option.
rental fee. It's like a rental
Right.
fee. So instead of them having to buy something that they use to serve their products in from the fair, they rent it. And then it just
Right.
goes through the system, right? It's the same idea.
Right. Right. I think
Yep.
that's a great idea.
I do
Great,
too, but
great presentation. Great, great, great.
thank you. We'll see. We'll see. I'm meeting with them again at the end of October
Yeah,
and
that's
I'll
what you
see what
said.
kind of energy I can get out of them. But yeah, we'll see. Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Carla, I did want to ask. So I love the idea of the reusable stuff, but speaking from personal experience, sometimes you take stuff home, like they
Yep.
make like really good vegan milkshakes that my sister and I usually get at the tail end of the fair. So like, how would the return process happen
Yeah,
for
so the way
those?
that I have it, we can go through some of that specific stuff as we even get them to be interested. But my plan was to have at every exit, just like you should anyway, have a big reusable capture bin at every exit. So people know to do that when they're leaving. And most of the exits are pretty controlled, so you can really do that pretty well at the fair. I think for things that you'd really want to take home, I would say nobody's gonna like stop you and run you down if you take something out with you. But the idea is that we really want it to be the capture rate of they charge about $1 a piece for anything that's lost. And the typical capture rate for the reusables is around 95% at most of their events and the places that they do reusables for our world. So it works pretty well. But I think that there will definitely be you call like a loss percentage, and that has to be paid for because those are purchased. So there is a cost there. But I would say in the case of yours, they could encourage and they can do this ahead of time that people, if they want to take stuff home, like the cookies or whatever, and those are kind of an exception because they're already served in a reusable container. But that's an example of where you could advertise ahead of time to just bring things in with you that can take things out so that you're not stealing the reusable state fair material. But yeah, it's something to consider how we message that and how we control those entrances and exits to make sure we capture as many of those as possible. But that's of course way down the road after we would pilot just cups and just in the grandstand and just kind of try things first. But that would be the grand vision. Yeah.
Yeah. Eh, Yeah, definitely sounds like there's a plan. If there's anything I can do.
Thank you. Yeah, I just need them to want to play with us. So, it's a challenge, you know, but I've had good response from the CEO, Renee Alexander. I'm feeling positive about it, but I can't say, you know, that it's still too early to know if they're really willing to try most of these things, but we're trying to help. So we'll see. Any other comments, questions?
We've got one last question. It says, can the exit collection stations have disposable options that people can transfer to?
You know, that's an option. It would be a question of who would pay for it, and the fair probably wouldn't want to if they're investing in reusables, but we could, yeah, I could think about that. I'll put it in my brain. See if there's a way to make that work in a small volume, potentially. But I think we would want to avoid any purchases of single use we could. You know, just encourage people to bring their own if they anticipate that. Any other comments or questions?
You know, Carla, so just a hypothetical scenario, maybe like we can like talk about reusables during the next eco experience, get people really excited about that to see if we could drum up public support for it.
Yeah, so I didn't mention this, but this year's fair, 2025, I ran a survey. Some of you would have seen me doing it or maybe even took it for me. If you were working, I had some folks do it. I see Hannah on the call. I know she did it for me. But I asked people about their experience with the waste program at the fair outside of our eco experience building, and specifically mentioned what if they would like to see reusables or how they would like to see that happen. And everybody that responded was like, oh, that would be amazing. Like that would be so much better than all this trash. So yes, I think people really want to see it. I don't know how much I could really advertise it without buy-in from the fair and some sort of plan for them to be going forward with it. But maybe I was kind of doing that this year, trying to drum up energy around it. And what I'm going to do in that October 22nd meeting with them is provide them with the survey results and what people were really excited about, which was primarily the reusables, and just seeing better communication on waste. So we'll see what they say, but yeah. Any other comments? Anyone super jazzed about it like me?
I think by all the comments, we all are jazzed about it.
Yep, I think so
Right?
too. A lot of interest.
If you want to go look at the pictures in the X Drive, you might have a heart attack, and it takes a really long time to load them all. But there's a folder in the X Drive in the Aero Sustainability Team folder for State Fair, and the report is in there and all the photos. It's pretty huge. But
Thank you.
yeah, there's a lot. And when you know what you're looking at, see, I know where every picture was taken. I like remember everything yet. So I know like, oh, I know who did that and this vendor did it or whatever. But yeah, it's amazing just the scale of that fair and how much waste and how much could be done about it that wouldn't be that hard. But some of it is, you know, I'm not going to minimize it. Some of it would be pretty tough to do, but it's not impossible. And some of it is really easy, like switching to some of those electronic processes would be so much easier in every way. It'd be win-win for most of it, that stuff. So
like you said, like Mark said, you know, it's a health issue for the employees, but even to have smaller, like, I don't know, troughs that all connect together and go into a bigger trough.
yeah,
And just to save the oil, where then people just have to do it, you know, waist high instead of lifting it way over their heads. That
exactly.
I know
That's
how
one
much
of the
5
recommendations.
gallons of water is, and
Yeah.
oil has to be more than water. I don't know. I'm not a
witnessed-
scientist, but yeah.
I
But
witnessed a lot of high school kids trying to lift it, dumping it all over the place. It was awful to watch. And I talked to a company, this is in the report too, a company, I think they're also in Golden Valley actually, that does the used cooking oil collection through a different way, and they can it's transportable. They can bring in the system and you can take it out at the end, so it's temporary, where you can pour it and it's below you and it goes into a cistern. Yes. And there's also, you know, you could do a huge project and like dig in tanks, which I wouldn't
Well,
do, but yeah,
something
yeah.
simple, even just some big troughs, and just connect little hoses and it goes to the bigger trough, and then they can empty that big trough at the end or something. I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. So I think one thing that I will say, and I'll be very careful, but I've been shocked that like we as an agency didn't put out a press release. We didn't put it on our website because we didn't want, you know, any concerns with the fair that we were trying to make them look bad or anything like that. But you know, I was surprised that the media and nobody's really picked it up. Because I did, you know, I put it out there to everybody who volunteered, and I've presented to several groups that have asked me to, but I'm always just, and anyone who wants to talk about it, I'm willing to share and talk about it, but it really hasn't gotten much attention. Especially I was excited this fair, I thought maybe it would, and you know, next fair it'll be 2 years old kind of, so that's like, ugh. So I'm a little bummed about that, and I guess I'm just saying I hope that it does get some attention at some point, you know, that the fair wants to do some of these things, or I hope that they do. Because if they really don't want to do any of these recommendations, I think it's just, you know, it's a huge missed opportunity. We'll say that.
I could even see it this year with the trash collection. Walking around the fair, they had like old S10 pickups that, you know, a teenager was driving.
Yep.
The trash bags are piled on the back. There's 2 teenagers on the top, and trash is falling out everywhere.
Yeah.
And you can see through the clear bags, everything is mixed. And I'm like, this doesn't lead to a lot of faith that it's going to get better wherever the trash is ending up.
And that's why I get into this a little bit more in the study, but I actually had to kind of keep most of it out because it gets a little too personal with the way they're doing things. So I had to be careful, but I talk about that process a little bit and just how they're just driving around with trucks, filling them up with kids, and then taking it out to the behind the grandstand and just dumping it back there. And it's kind of insane. Like it's a free for all. And I was checking that every day. And I mean, this year I had a report of a fire back there that I'm trying to keep things light, but it's bad. I'll just say it that way. And it's not, I'm not saying that sanitation and managing an event with that much trash is ever going to be easy. It's just not. But there are so many opportunities to reduce that volume of trash like we're talking about, so it isn't as much. And then also just like having some staff and some money behind it. So it's not just this one person's job to like deal with the trash, right? That's just when we're talking about an event this big with this much impact, when we have state goals around waste reduction and diversion, I mean, what the heck? We got to do better. But because they're their own entity, we can't force them to do anything really. So that's why I'm trying really hard to convince them this way and partner and help them. So hopefully we'll get somewhere there.